Officers Anthony and Brandon were on yet another dull afternoon patrol, passing time by chatting with colleagues. Their conversation came to an abrupt halt when an elderly woman suddenly collapsed right in front of them. But instead of offering help, they couldn't hold back their laughter. Their amusement quickly faded when they learned the identity of the mysterious woman and just how much trouble they were about to face. Who was this elderly woman, and what connection made their actions so serious? Would they apologize for their behavior, and more crucially, could their jobs be on the line if they didn't? When officers Anthony and Brandon first joined the police force, they were eager and excited to serve their city. But over time, that excitement faded. Once proud and honorable men had turned into officers who would laugh at a woman falling instead of helping her. The routine patrols and small crimes felt meaningless to them, and they believed they weren't given work that matched their abilities. Sarah always made sure her clothes were perfect and her hair was neatly styled. As she took a sharp breath, she tripped and fell, her bag hitting the ground and scattering its contents. Officers Anthony and Brandon stood nearby, just a short distance from where Sarah fell. What they did next would change their careers forever. Instead of helping her after hearing her frightened gasp, something unexpected happened. Officer Anthony let out a small chuckle, and Officer Brandon burst into loud laughter. Sarah, who had scraped her skin on the rough pavement, struggled to get up. Anthony, with a smirk, made a comment. Brandon, joining in, grinned and said, "A real trip down memory lane." As they exchanged jokes, they didn't notice the disapproving stares of the onlookers. A small crowd had formed around the incident. A young woman rushed forward to help Sarah, gently turning her over and checking for any injuries. As she stood up straight again, she cast a nasty glance at the two officers, who were still making jokes. Seeing how they were too engrossed to notice anything wrong with Sarah, the young woman sneered at them. "How could you?" Her voice trembled with fury as she addressed the two policemen, who turned toward her, finally stopping their jokes. Feeling untouchable in their uniforms, the officers were indifferent, but when they learned who Sarah truly was, they would realize how wrong they were. The young woman continued, "Is this the kind of protection and service we're supposed to expect from you?" Officer Brandon was the first to open his mouth. He leaned toward Officer Anthony and quietly asked, "Who is she?" Anthony shrugged, his usual confident demeanor faltering. "I don't know, but I have a feeling we need to find out." Meanwhile, Sarah was gently escorted to a nearby bench. Concerned bystanders tried to make her comfortable, tending to the small scrapes on her skin. As she sat on the bench nursing her minor injuries, a storm of emotions raged within her. The laughter of the officers echoed in her ears, their faces etched in her memory. Over the years, Sarah noticed fewer officers patrolling as the city grew and crime increased. The police force was stretched thin, dealing with long hours and thankless tasks. By the next morning, the incident was the talk of the town. Coffee shops and street corners buzzed with gossip, and over time, the community's trust in the police began to fade. Parents warned their children, and elderly residents like Sarah felt uneasy at the sight of a police car. The city, once proud of its officers, now mourned the loss of its faith in them. When officers Anthony and Brandon returned to the precinct, the atmosphere had changed. The usual friendly banter was gone, replaced by cold silence and distant stares. As the day wore on, it became clear that Anthony and Brandon had been branded the shameful duo of the precinct. Their actions had not only embarrassed themselves, but had also cast a shadow over the entire department. The weight of the situation pressed heavily on them, and their earlier indifference had transformed into gnawing anxiety. Back at their desks, officers Anthony and Brandon booted up their computers and accessed the city's database, hoping to find any information on Sarah. Despite their exhaustive efforts, Sarah's identity remained elusive. She was like a ghost, present in their memories but absent from all records. Exhausted and on the verge of giving up, Anthony decided to take a break and wandered into the precinct's archives. Amidst the dusty shelves and old case files, a yellowed newspaper caught his eye. Curiosity piqued, he began to skim through it. As he flipped through the pages, an article grabbed his attention. The headline hinted at a significant event from years ago, and as he read on, he realized he might have stumbled upon a crucial piece of the puzzle. Hastily, Anthony rushed back to their shared desk, the old newspaper clutched tightly in his hand. "Brandon, you need to see this," he said. The article detailed a community event from decades ago, celebrating the resilience and spirit of the city's residents. It spoke of notable figures, philanthropists, and everyday heroes. But what caught the officers' attention was a mention of a woman named Sarah who had played a pivotal role in a community project. The details matched Sarah's description, and the timeline seemed to fit. Beside the article was an old black and white photograph. It showcased a group of people, but one face stood out, a younger Sarah. Her eyes, sparkling with determination and kindness, looked back at them. They had inadvertently discovered a piece of her past, a chapter of her life that had been immortalized in print. They had insulted a woman who had once been celebrated in the very city they had vowed to protect. The guilt was overwhelming. They had to make amends, not just for their sake, but for Sarah's and the legacy she represented. The officers began to plan their approach. They would visit Sarah, face their mistake head-on, and offer a heartfelt apology. With a deep breath, Officers Anthony and Brandon stood outside Sarah's residence. They knocked gently, waiting for the door to open. When Sarah greeted them, her eyes held a mix of surprise and weariness. The officers cleared their throats, hoping she would grant them a few moments of her time to seek her forgiveness. Inside Sarah's cozy living room, the officers began, "We deeply regret our actions, ma'am," Anthony started, his eyes downcast. Brandon added, "We failed in our duty, not just as officers, but as human beings." Their apology was heartfelt, the remorse evident. Sarah listened intently, her face inscrutable. After a long pause, she finally spoke. "We all make mistakes," she began, her voice gentle. "What matters is that we learn from them." Her words were filled with grace and understanding, showcasing her magnanimity. She acknowledged their sincere remorse and, in her wisdom, offered them a chance at redemption. Hoping to make amends, the officers offered to drive Sarah to her special place. They arrived at a beautiful memorial park with a statue honoring community heroes. As Sarah shared stories of those remembered in stone, the officers were reminded of the values they had once vowed to uphold. Then, Sarah revealed something that stunned them. "My younger son is now the chief of police." Realizing they had laughed at the mother of their leader, Anthony and Brandon were shocked. But Sarah hadn't told her son about the incident, believing they would come to apologize on their own. "Everyone can lose their way," she said gently, "but it's never too late to find the right path again." Humbled, the officers silently promised to be better. Over time, their renewed dedication to serving the community with compassion began to rebuild the trust they had broken. Their story became a symbol of hope, showing that it's never too late to correct one's mistakes and regain honor.